what's going on. We have a tradition of calling our series after Mary Dumont, who was a wonderful member of our congregation. And we remember her today, L'Tova, for the good. Our three-part series about the image of God. One might argue that nothing is as important if you'd like, you can move over here to be closer. Might be better. Arguably nothing. This is an extremely important question as to who we are as human beings. And this is, in our first session, we'll talk about that somehow there's a spark of God within us. It's an expression that started in the days of the students of the ASBEE, and we have to understand what that is all about. Then the second session, we'll talk about the image of God across Jewish literature, the Rishonim to the Achronim to different authorities. Rabbi Salvation, what do people say? What is the image of God? And in our third week, we'll look at the Sforno. Why the Sforno? Sforno of all commentaries emphasizes Tzelem Elokim as a general principle that guides us throughout his commentary on the Chumash, not just in Genesis to explain few verses in Genesis, but that he thinks it's a major principle in all of the Torah, and we're going to show how Tzelem Elokim. Those of you online, I don't have the sheets for you because of problems with my computer, but hopefully in other weeks we'll figure that out. Okay. So those in person, we want to begin the notion that we are children of God. Ready? The Baal Tanya thought this was a good analogy. When I say that so-and-so is my child, what are different ways in which I mean that? What does it mean for someone to be someone's child? What are the implications of that?
Being the offspring, the direct descendants.
Right. So there's a biological piece that somehow there's something in them that's in me. There's a similarity. There is also actual DNA that's in there from the parent. And so if we speak of being children to God, what does that mean? Is there something in us that's from God that makes us children of God? Something similar about us? What else could a child be? Sometimes a child is not a biological child, or there's another way of being a child. We say students are children.
So teachings are instilled in children.
Right. So it could be that we're children, that we are educated and guided by God. In that case,
Could it be we're students of our teachers are our parents spiritually?
Yes, there is a notion that if you teach someone else's children Torah, it is if you bore them. So because we find that Aaron's children are described as his children, so there is, and Moses taught Aaron's children. Good. So we could just be students of God. In this conflict as to how to describe being children of God, we could say our whole discussion for this evening is inherent in that very discussion. If you say it's something more DNA related, that there's something in our DNA that's from God's DNA, so to speak, or something like that, okay, that there's something in us, then we would say maybe that the spark of God, the neshama of God is within us. Somehow there's something of God in us. Or do we say, no, it just we are similar to God, like parents and children are similar to children, that we are taught by God, we are led by God. So this question of what it means to be children of God may relate to this question of what it means to have a spark of God within. Okay, now let's turn to the key verse that leads to the notion of the Pintele, as it's saying in Yiddish, that point within you that's Jewish, or the spark within. When I use the expression Pintele, it becomes a Jewish thing. Generally speaking, we assume that the description in Genesis is for all of humanity. There were those who wanted to say that somehow it doesn't. Perhaps we'll discuss that in another week. But let's just assume we're talking about all human beings for now. And question of Jewish soul, things like that, we will sort of leave out of this series, actually. So when it says in Genesis 2 that God blew in his nostrils the breath of life, or the neshama of life, neshama and breathing is the same word. What does it mean? Clearly, if someone blows something into you, then there's something of him in you. But when I blow into a balloon, there's nothing really of me in the balloon. The breath is outside of me. Or you could say, no, if I blow something into you, after all, my molecules and my germs and my DNA and all that. So again, does it imply that there's something of God in you? So let's go to the main source, because all the mystics use the expression, being that we have a part of God from above. It's based on a verse in Job that's not talking about this, but it is an expression that's found in Job. So what does the Zohar say? So let's take a look at a number of passages in the Zohar. Will be the centerpiece of our discussion today. The Holy One, blessed be He, put the upper soul in us. Upper soul, it implies that it comes from above. Here you have two expressions, which you can take them normatively, you can take them Kabbalistic. Normatively, it's simply saying that in your soul is wisdom and knowledge, wisdom and understanding. So if you want to take a more rational view of what a neshama is, all it is, according to this, is what? Wisdom. So He made us smart, as we'll see next week when we talk about the Tzelem Elokim, image of God. Some people say it just means that we're smart, smarter than the average bee or bear or a lion or tiger. However, of course, those familiar with Kabbalah is also the notion that the highest levels of expression of God in this world, what we call the Sfirot, the emanations of God, is Chochmah Bina V'das. The Chabad, it's the name of a local movement, an international movement, borrows its name from the three higher expressions of God in this world, Chochmah Bina V'das. So maybe that's what it's saying. Then he said, he gets more explicit. Where do we get the neshama from? Yitzchak says, where the other neshamas come from, which is bina. So it comes from the upper sfirot. There are 3 higher sfirot and 7 lower sfirot, and it comes from the higher sfirot. Okay, so it comes from a very high place. We'll get, if you're a little confused by the Kabbalistic terminology, we'll explain it in a moment. Let's read on. So what is neshama? Where is it from? Where is it from? So he's saying that it comes from God's expression in this world. Now, if you say that, let's say when God created the world, He emanated these characteristics to this world, and so then we come from an emanation of God. So that is also close to saying that we come from something of God. Let's continue. It says here, going from page 1, going on to page 2, He made us in a higher form. We have 3 elements. In the idea that our soul has 3 sides to it, and the neshama is the highest. Claims that the neshama's main purpose is to know and keep God's mitzvahs. So at its core, what is a neshama? It's a very normative kind of an idea. It's a kind of an idea that you don't have to be a Hasidic Rebbe to accept, or some mystic in Sfat to accept that what? That the neshama is that part of you that's inclined toward mitzvahs of Hashem. Interesting. Get back to that at the very end of this year. We'll see something about that. And finally, another passage before we get to a little review about Kabbalah. He says, God blew into our mouths a living neshama. This is the holy neshama, comes from Bina, from this higher level, etc., etc. Now, a little Kabbalistic review over here, right? So you have Chochmah Bina V'das, which is wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Those are the 3 higher emanations from God. The lower emanations, Chesed, words first, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, Malchus, some of which are very easily understood, some are more difficult, but things like kindness, power, splendor, eternity, glory, foundation, whatever that means, and kingship. So if you think about this in a sort of a non-Kabbalistic way, what do human beings have from God? You have the ability to be kind as God is kind. Abraham, this week's Parsha, kind like God is kind. God gives the whole world. Abraham gave everything to his guest. Power to hold back. Yitzchak, splendor. Human being can have splendor. Can we have eternity? So that's interesting. So here's the problem. You might say, what do you mean? Don't we believe in the eternity of the soul? But the question is the soul eternal only on the back end, the front end, or the back end? It's common idea that, if you're really righteous, your soul will last forever with God. Does that mean it was always there? If it was always there, well, there's only one thing that was always there and always will be there, and that's God. Does that mean you have a part of God with you? Does God have parts? No, God doesn't have parts. So what are we talking about? So when we say that eternity, that's interesting. But the idea that simply we are children of God, or God blew into us something similar to Him because we have the ability of kindness, power, splendor, maybe eternity, glory, kingship. This is clear to everyone, right? That human being is capable of being very stately, right? Some people are actually kings. Some people just have a stately nature, right? You say that person has a certain regal personality. Doesn't have to be king of anything. It comes from God. So God gave us these things to be able to have these qualities. Okay. Now, which part of the sphirot do we get our God? We get our soul from? So, right, I would have said, what do you mean? I have these characteristics. I'm kind. I have some power. I have a little splendor. I have a little glory. I have a little kingship, a little authority. The lower parts. And wisdom, my wisdom is not the same as God's wisdom. But so far we saw in the Zohar that it was from the higher elements. But is this the essence of God? Are any of the 10 things the essence of God? No. We have this basic idea that the Ein Sof, that God in essence is way above these 10 things. So then we're not talking about the essence of God. You don't have the essences of God in us. We have these reflections. And then if you want to take it very Kabbalistically, so somehow it's from this emanation from God. If you want to take it not so Kabbalistically, we have characteristics that God has, we also have. Okay. We continue with the Zohar number 2. You come and see a man is born, does not have the power from above until he is circumcised. So we begin to see stages. Here in number 2, progressive soul making. We have a new idea that the neshama was not breathed into us, poof, and that's it. But actually, you're born, then you're circumcised, then you get the neshama. When Rabbi Klein does a bris, he likes to mention this and make a mishaberach for your new soul that you get. Right? Usually, most people don't think about that, but it's based on his Zohar here that you get special neshama. Now, what if someone didn't have a circumcision or they're not Jewish? So this gets into this other question about the Jewish soul, and I'm going to assume that there's something special about being Jewish, but in terms of our discussion in general about Tzelem Elokim and image of God, I'm going to be prejudiced and give this course as if there's no difference between Jew and a Gentile as far as absolute soul. Okay, moving along. Once you have the Ruach, then you learn Torah, you get more stirrings, you did mitzvot, you get more stirrings, you married and had a child, and you taught them the ways of God, then you become a complete man from all the world. So there's an idea that neshama continues to grow within you. We even have an idea that on Shabbos, your neshama yesera comes in at different point. Your extra soul of Shabbos comes in at different prayers. Nishmas is a great place for it to come in, and other points during Shabbos for parts of your soul to come in. So there's an idea of progressive soul, but that's interesting because that means that you acquire it. It's not something you have automatically. You acquire. Does that give me more Tzelem Elokim than someone else? Are we talking about Tzelem Elokim so far? We haven't said the word Tzelem Elokim. We did not invoke the image of God verse. We invoked another verse from a different chapter 2, not chapter 1, or chapter 5 has image of God, and chapter 9 is the image of God, where we're invoking chapter 2, which talks about breathing into us. And saying that he breathed in what? Nisham. What about converts? How does a convert have, if indeed there's more neshama for a bris and all that? So he claims that there's neshama that comes with the conversion as well. Okay, now I'm going to skip a little bit, and that it talks about different types of that some people have neshama that comes from this world or middle world or lower world. So there could be unequal neshamas. And again, if you read it's Tanya, the great Chabad work, they had this idea of sort of differentiating neshamas. Again, I think we have to be very careful with this in terms of the notion that one person is greater than another. But he does claim that some who know the secrets of the Torah, people of character who take neshama from Malchus of Atzilus, which is from the 10 Sfirot. So he wants to claim that some people take all 10 Sfirot and they go from Atzilut, they go from a very high world. So could some people be getting their soul more directly from God? I saw one description that said, when we say directly, we just mean that God does it very directly. It's not actually directly from it. Moving along. Yalkut Shimoni. Here's just a plain midrash, and it says, that Moses said to God, may God appoint, may God, who is the God of all souls and spirits, may he appoint someone over the congregation. So what does that mean? He says all spirits come from him. Again, I don't want to make too much of that, but here's a notion that the spirit, our neshama, comes from God. From God. But if you're a rationalist, all this is a little bit disturbing. The notion that there could be anything from God in me seems to run in the face of absolute unity. If there's absolute unity, then part of God can't be over here and part of God is over there. If there's a little bit of God in me, then it makes me a little bit pantheistic, then you should worship me because there's a part of God in me. If I'm really holy, then I'll have really big neshama. It really comes from God. And then you should definitely worship me. So again, it's really the same danger we have with being children of God, right? We know that another religion took the notion of children of God and took it to the idea that there's somebody who's child of God, mamish, like absolute, and then you worship that person. So there's a lot of danger here. So listen to the Ibn Ezra, who's a rationalist. Usually wouldn't expect the Ibn Ezra to even get involved in this kind of mystical kind of topic, but he has to get involved for rational reasons. Now we go to the image of God. Let's make man in our image. So he's commenting on Genesis. So he says, Chalila, Chalila, God forbid, to be any image of God. After all, El Mitzvah Muni, to whom can you compare me? It says, says, look, the soul which it doesn't die, so it's similar in its life to God, and it doesn't have a body, and it's and a person is like a small world. So in some parable, in some sort of metaphor, the soul is like it's in the image of God. Why? Because your neshama it doesn't die. God doesn't die, your neshama doesn't die. There's a certain parallel between the two, but it's not an actual image of what God looks like. Notice, for the first time tonight, we're talking about the image of God, and we're talking about souls. He's connecting those two. The Zohar did not. Then he says elsewhere, chapter 19, you die, you should know. It comes from the middle world. There's an upper world, middle world, and the lower world. It comes from the middle world. But the body comes from the lower world. Good. Then he says, the bottom of page 4, the soul is wisdom, and it rests in the brain, and from it comes all the feelings and desires. It seeks authority to stand up against those who oppose it. It gets mad. So So again, there's this intellectual soul, which we'll talk about next week. The idea that the soul is wisdom, and it's from the brain, not in the heart. Where's your neshama? In your heart or in your brain? So he's an intellectual. He thinks it's in the brain. Okay. He says, there are three souls. Now we're making the world's souls kind of cheap. We're going to assume the vegetable world has souls. That's not so important. You have an animal soul, it's not so important. And then only the man has the third, which speaks, which knows the difference between truth and falsehood and has wisdom. And God gave man seicha, which is called heart, to fulfill its desire, to do mitzvot. So here we get the idea that the soul that we have is something that does what? It helps us have seichel, to know the difference between truth and falsehood, wisdom, to do the mitzvos of God, like the Zohar said, to choose the right things. Good. Some people refer to Bechira, we'll talk about that next week. Maybe the essence of our singularity as human beings is our ability to choose to do mitzvot. Good. Then again, for the Ibn Ezra, our soul is very intellectual, right? And it has to do with truth and knowing what the truth is. It's like the tree of wisdom. Okay. But now we get to the Ramban. Ramban is not such a rationalist. He's very comfortable with the mystical. He is a mystic. He lives before the official coming out of the Zohar, but he's got all kinds of mystical ideas. And he says something that sounds much more like that the soul is directly from God. Again, going back to that blowing into our nostrils of neshama of life. It seems that he breathed. The verse hints to us the greatness of the soul, its foundation and secret. To say it does not come from the elements. What are the four elements, right? Earth, wind, fire, and water. So it's not from those elements, and not even from the emanation from intelligence, but it's the spirit of the great name. Now this seems like fighting words. He says, "Lo mishtal shalut min hasachlim ani lo." Not a great Kabbalist. I can't say exactly. Maybe some of you have your own thoughts on it, but it seems to say it's not coming from emanation. It's not like, well, there's the essence of God. Then there's things that emanate from God. It's not coming from the emanations. It's from the great name of God, the Spirit of God, from His mouth. Wisdom and knowledge. Ruach Hashem agadol mipiv da'at. It's direct wisdom directly from God. One who breathes from his mouth gives you from his soul, right? He claims. And when you breathe into that balloon, you're not taking air, which is an oxygen you got from the other guy or from the street, and you put the oxygen into the balloon. No, you're taking from yourself, from something that's inside your lungs, inside you, and you put it out there. So, and then it comes from the neshama of God. It was given, and not from emanation. So the Ramban seems to be closer to the notion that the soul really is something of God itself. Again, sure, you can reread this in different ways, but it would seem to lean in that direction. The Rav is going to explain to us the Rabbeinu Bachya. Bachya was a student of the Ramban, also Spanish, and he says like this. I'm sorry, not that Rabbeinu Bachya. The Rabbeinu Bachya, who was and he says as follows: for the soul is a simple spiritual. It's in the Chovos Halevavos. The soul is a simple spiritual entity which inclines to what resembles it among similar spiritual entities, and in accordance with its nature, removes itself from its opposites and gross bodies. So the soul is pure spirit. So page 6, number 7. The soul loves things that are spiritual. It's drawn to spiritual things. When the Creator ties it to the body, which is gross, to test it, He stirred it to incline toward it due to the association which is placed in it from the beginning. So God did us a favor. He gave us a soul. Should I call him, bro? He gave us a soul that's inclined toward the spiritual. we're lucky, right? We have a soul that's inclined towards the spiritual. So the Rav, Rabbi Soloveitchik explains 7a. Rabbeinu Bach is suggesting that man loves God because, in a way, he is part of God. We have something in us that's either created by God, or it's related to God, or however you want to describe it. That's why we love God. We love God because we love something similar to ourselves. Just like the man is looking for the woman because he's looking for the other half of himself, a human being is looking for God because there's something in us that's inclined toward God. Now, what I noticed that when I search the notion of Chiluk ol Kamimal, portion of God from above, which is again a verse in Job that does not mean that we have a part of God in us, but it's later used that way, that there's a part of God in us or something like that. Again, that expression, part of God, probably heretical, probably does not mean what it says, but it sort of sounds like that. This expression is found particularly in the writings of the Alshich and the Shalom. The Alshich was a student of Rabbi Yosef Karo. He got smicha from him, and he was a mystic in Tzfat. The Shalom, Rabbi Hurwitz, the Alshich originally comes from Greece, the Ottoman Empire. The Shalom was Rabbi Hurwitz. He was more European, Prague, etc. Lived a little later, around 1600, and was considered one of the great mystics, and eventually dies in Tzfat also, was buried there as well. Okay. So let's take a look at some of what they say about this notion of a portion of God from above. So far, we haven't been using the expression so much, a portion of God from above. Now let's look at the expression. Similar to Rabbeinu Bach Yebba, that's why I called it 7b. Briti Shalom, that Pinchas was given a covenant of peace. The neshama is mine from under the throne of glory. So the throne of glory is also a Kabbalistic expression of some sort, and an image as well, but it's under the divine throne. Our souls, the Jewish souls, come from down there, and it was given to an ugly vessel, that's the body, never cease the desire to leave and return to God with every breath. It's always trying to get back to God because that's where it's from. He put the Shekhinah with us. So there's something in us that's either God-like, inclined toward God, or somehow connected to God. It always tries to go back. So far, we really have two possibilities. One is that there's God in essence, and we don't touch that. And then there's things that God expresses in this world, reflections of God we can see in this world, and he puts within us these abilities to reflect him in all the 10 different ways that we speak of the Sefirot, and particularly wisdom and knowledge and understanding. So it's either that somehow some sort of essence of God, or more philosophically, less philosophically challenging, would be to say that that's simply an emanation of God we have within us. However, there is another view. Listen to the Rav Saadia Gaon. This Rav Saadia Gaon is the ultimate rationalist. He wrote the first philosophical treatise after the Talmud, and before the Rambam or anybody else, and he's a big rationalist. So he says, what it seems regarding the soul that is created, shehi bruah, and munot v'deo, in this big work, it's created. It's a creature. We were thinking that what is God? What is God? I don't know. It's hard to know. He's infinite. It's hard to describe something infinite. But we do know what emanates from God, and our soul has all that stuff, the good stuff that emanates from God. So does that mean we have something from God? He says, no. God created something. It's called the soul, and he put it in us. So is it from God? Yeah, but not that different from, let's say, how an apple is from God too. Okay. So this is the view of Saadia Gaon, that it is a created being. The soul is created. He says everything. He says it's not possible for there to One second. One second. I might have to go get my charger. I probably.
Can I get it for
Do
you?
you know where my office is?
I do not, but I can
No.
find it. Rabbi's in here.
You dropped something, Rabbi.
But you
The-
don't know.
You know where the main sanctuary of the Baron Hirsch is?
Yeah.
To the left of it, there's a little hole.
Okay.
You just pretend you're going to go out the building.
Uh-huh.
But go to the right before you leave the building. And that you'll be to the right. So you'll be to the left of the sanctuary.
Okay.
All the way in the back is an office. It says our name on it. Go when you get in, turn the light on the wall. Just press it once, not twice, and go to the back of the office. Straight ahead through this curtain, and you'll find my charger.
Charger.
It's on the floor. It's a big
On the
white,
floor.
it's huge, big white
Is
charger.
it already in the outlet?
Yeah, it's in an outlet, but it's in one of these flat outlets.
Not bad.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Phil. Appreciate it. Call me if you have trouble. So it's not possible for there to be anything eternal other than the creator, right? So we can't say that we have a soul. This is going to always. So he says, for it says in Zechariah, Hashem creates the spirit of man in it. Yotze ruach adam b'kibro. That's a pasuk in Zechariah. So that's what he says. And then he says, so it's clear to me that the soul is wisdom for several vantage points. One, it cannot learn wisdom from the body, but you can't learn wisdom from your body, so you must learn wisdom from your soul. Good. Okay. So he also thinks that it is wisdom, that the soul is wisdom. And you saw that in the Ibn Ezra. Surely he got it from the Shad Yigon. That the soul is nothing, the big mystical thing. It's the idea of wisdom. Okay. Now, Rabbi Soloveitchik tries to make this point from our morning prayers. I want to show you how you could take two things from our morning prayers. Rabbi Soloveitchik leaned in one direction. Number 9. In our morning prayers, what do we say? Elokai, God, my God. Neshama shenatata bi Torah. The soul that you gave me, it's pure. Good. Ata v'rata, you created it. Ata yitzarta, you fashioned it. Ata nefachta bi, you blew it in me. What were those phrases? What were those phrases? Which position does this prayer support? The idea that the soul is something from God or something He created? Why? Created, right? So Rav Soloveitchik says, you see, our morning prayer says that the soul was created just like Rav Sadigo. However, if you're the Baal Tanya, you might say, what do you mean? It also says what I said. If you're the Zohar, you would say, it says what I said. What does it say? He blew it into you. Now, once it's created, we're done. That's that's the position that is created. But when you say that you blew it into me, when you blow something into someone, you're taking something from someone, from God. So, whereas salvation, though, is conclusive that the Elokai Neshama prayer, which goes back to the Talmud, says soul was created. Of course, there can be other souls, different. That's one soul, and that's okay. Some other moderate possibilities. Okay. Hope I didn't send my Mission Impossible. Okay. Okay. We'll have to go send the reconnaissance mission in a minute. So I mentioned the Alshich and the Shalah. So we're going to continue with the Alshich. One of the first people to get smicha from the Rabbi Yosef Karo. Usually we start with Nefesh, then by merit, Ruach, and in full Shlemut Neshama. So we mentioned this Zohar that we move on. We go higher and higher. Adam and Eve were given it all right away. So here's an interesting idea that some people could get all the elements, could have something perhaps that's more close to the Spirit of God itself, and some of us may be farther away. Good. Mentions this image of, oh, great. Great. Excuse me. Thank you so much. Did you have trouble?
No.
Great.
Left your light on them, so you have to turn it.
Yeah, I have to go back in. Okay. Let me just plug this in a second. Hopefully we built this with plugs. Oh, there's one over there. There we go. Long cord. So we can do this. Okay. Okay. So here we have the Alshich mentioning this expression, Chilek el Kamimal, a portion of God above. It's like Eicha 23:4. My portion, Hashem, my soul says, Chelki Hashem Amran Nafshi. And Hashem is my portion. So again, usually they quote a verse in Job, which is not talking about God being a part of us. He quotes the verse in Eicha in Lamentations that says, Chelki Hashem Amran Nafshi, that you are my portion. Okay. That the soul of every Jew, again, he's talking about Jews, is a portion of God above. So he says we come from the 10 aspects. It's not just Chachma that we get our soul from all the different aspects, which again has the Kabbalistic meaning and has a more normative meaning as well. Then he said something that I think every yeshiva bacher would have to love. He says, we are like the plantings of God. Now we had a new image. We have sons, we have soul, and we have the plantings of God. Planted with Torah, right? We say that God planted the Torah within the Chayei Olam, which is inseparable from his essence. May it be blessed under the divine wings. So what do we say? We're struggling the whole night to say, what is this soul thing? So we say, it's from the emanations of God. He says, nonsense. It's very simple. God put Torah within our soul. Torah, Kuchabrichu, Israel, Kuchabrichu Chad, the Jews, the Torah, and really he implanted within us the spirit of Torah. That's the soul that's within you, is the spirit of Torah, which is not that different from when at the beginning we talked about the Zohar, who said that the whole idea of the soul was to help you follow the commandments. And the Ibn Ezra said the idea of the soul is wisdom, so you can keep the commandments. That's interesting. The Shalah, Rabbi Hurwitz lived a little bit later. If man had not sinned, the soul would be in essence. Because in theory, the soul would be from the essence of God. And so will it be one day. Maybe we could have that soul again. But it is in us, but not mamish. When it comes to us, it's not totally from the image from God. In our image, when it says we're in the image of God, it's in the secret of the neshama. And in our form, when it says in our form, it's the secret of the body. Again, the shalah connects the idea of making God in our image with the idea of neshama, which again, we didn't see in the Zohar, but we see over here. When it says that we should be in the image, that's the neshama. In our form, that's the secret of the body. What's the secret of the body? We'll talk about that next week. He just alludes to it. He says, from my flesh, I see God. That's also a verse in Job that God could see God from his own flesh. So we'll have to talk about that next week. What role does the body play in all this? We'll get back to that. Now here's a little gematria, but the gematria goes back to, I think, a very non-gematria kind of a point, very Litvisha point. You take the first and last letters of nefesh, ruach, and neshama, right? There are 3 types of neshama. He said you get them at different stages of your life, and that's why we have sometimes 3 candles. We're lighted at your side, different things, and 3 candles. Some shuls are like 3 candles. that's nefesh, nun and shin, and ruach is a rage. And then take neshama, take the neshama, that's the nun, the 50, and then the last letter is hey, add it all together, you get 613. Because really, the soul and the mitzvot are related. Going back to the point, we keep making that God implanted in us, God implanted in us the mitzvot. What do we say? How many mitzvot do we have? They correspond to parts of our body. So the mitzvot are implanted in us. So he makes an interesting point. These are little snippets I got from the Shalah. You have to have derech eretz for your neshama. No, if you're a teacher and a boy, girl does something very disrespectful, something that's you shouldn't do, you could say to them, have a little derech eretz for your neshama. Right? Have some common courtesy for your neshama that's in you. You're a human being. How could you do something like that? Have a little derech eretz for your neshama. Again, that makes the neshama kind of separate from ourselves. But it doesn't have to mean that that neshama is God or something. It could be the neshama is a spiritual creation of God. You should also give a derech eretz. Now, by the way, that which is not very philosophically sound to say, and that is that there's a part of God in everyone. We come up with this very beautiful idea that when you encounter other people, you encounter the God within. And I heard this as an interpretation of this week's parsha, that Abraham ran out to greet what? The holiness within each person. And so it's a very nice idea, but philosophically, you have to be careful. It's better to say that there's something holy that God created and put in us. And therefore, when you greet another human being, you're greeting that holy thing that God put in. That's the easier things. Soul lights up with every mitzvah, since the mitzvot are related to your soul. So when you do a mitzvah, it lights it up. It's the food for the mitzvah. You eat to feed our body, but you do a mitzvah to feed your soul. So there is this possibility we discussed tonight that the soul is not a creation, like Rabbeinu Bach, but rather but maybe it's a bria, or maybe it's a hatzala. It's like an emanation. It's something that comes from God, but it's not God himself. Now, in Hasidus, apparently one of the big mantras that some like to proclaim from the Zohar, the Likutei Zohar, something like that, is that there's nothing that's devoid of divinity. If you take that position and it leaves you open to some pantheism a little bit, it's appealing at a first glance. Oh, there's nothing devoid of God. That's great. There's everything. But then there's a danger that I'll tell you that, everyone in this room is divinely endowed, but I've been working on it for many years as a rabbi, so I have a little more than you do. So listen to me, because I'm God, because we're all God, but you're just not very good at it. I'm much better. So there's a great danger there. So we have to be careful about that. But there's the mayor Maury Naimler from Chernobyl said everything is Elokus, everything is God. So this is a very pantheistic kind of an idea. There's a more modern idea, Yesh Yesod b'toch havaya. There's an element, there's a foundation within all of creation that's holy. That's a less radical way of saying it. So each Hasidic rabbi may have had a different way of putting it and explaining it. So in the, someone left it out, but in the Baal Tanya, there is an expression that every Jew is chiluk l'kol imal mamish. He wrote that every Jew is a portion above mamish. So I was fishing around. I was trying to reach my good friend in St. Louis, who's a good Chabad Kabbalist. Maybe I'll speak to him before next week. But I was reading something that one authority who spoke to some Chabadniks and experts in Tanya wrote that that even that doesn't mean that. In other words, even though it says every person is a portion from God, mamish, totally. He doesn't mean totally. What do you mean totally? He means it's an amazing parable. He uses this language. He himself says, Chas v'shalom, don't think that different parts of God. So if you look in different parts of Tanya, you can see otherwise. But you can hear lectures from Chabadniks who say, what do you mean? It says in the Tanya, mamish is mamish. God is mamish. A part of God is mamish in everybody. I heard a lecture from Rabbi Chait, who's Rabbi Gerstein's Rabbi. He's very extreme on this view, very fiery against anyone who would dare to think there are parts of God in anything. God is one unity, and he is wherever he is, whether he's inside creation, outside creation, but there are no parts of him anywhere. So he's very, very strong about it. So in the end, you have these options here as an outline at the end of this sheet. You have this linguistic possibility that we're talking about divinity mamish, that there's some sort of eternal thing from God actually that's within you. Maybe Adam had something like that. Maybe we're supposed to have something like that. Maybe one day we get something like that. That's the most radical view. The next most radical is that God emanated different feelings and vibes and abilities and possibilities and talents and beauties. And maybe that's what we have. Second possibility, it's an emanation. Third, more moderate, less Kabbalistic ideas that it's not so fancy, just attributes of the divine. We simply have attributes of the divine, right? Now, according to this, animals have it too, meaning a lion may have certain regal characteristics. A bird may have certain splendor. Some birds may have certain generosity. Again, I don't know. Rabbi Lichter mentioned tonight that from Rabbi Kudner that if something is just ingrained within you from nature, then it's not really a characteristic. But so I don't know if they really have kindness because the bird just, naturally feeds its young. I don't know if it has to overcome anything to do so. But we could say that we simply are endowed with attributes of the divine or potential for different attributes. Some of us have more or less of these attributes. You can develop them. We can develop all the attributes of God for some. This is the Tomer Devorah, the Moshe Cordovero. That's his whole book, is the idea that God has 13 characteristics. And so our job, his idea was, you want to write a Musar book, you don't need to come up with a speech of how everyone should be better and things like that. You take the 13 principal ways and do the same thing. In that sense, walking, we saw allusions to this at the beginning, walking in God's ways, we saw in the Zohar, walking in God's ways, being created in the image of God are similar, right? What image of God means you're similar to God. To walk in God's ways means be similar. That's our job, to walk in God's attributes. God is kind, we try to be kind. God is merciful, forgiving, we try to do the same. Then we have this other moderate possibilities that, well, if you merit, you might have this spark within, but not necessarily. And finally, we have the idea that very far away from this idea that there's a piece of God in everybody, rather, no, God created a holy soul, which is, it's much as a creation as my body, as anything else. It's just a holy creation. It inclines toward the holiness. He could create something gross and very physical, and he creates something very spiritual. That's what he did. He took that spiritual thing and he put it within us. You could say that last point relates to other points, meaning maybe when we say that we have attributes of God, we have the possibility of chachma, possibility of wisdom, possibility of understanding, possibility of glory, of kingship, of kindness. God created us with the ability to achieve all these things, and that's what it is. It's interesting to ponder the notion that God gave us a leg up. On the one hand, he created some sort of a Yetzer Hara. We have to explain what that is. But aside from the evil inclination, is we also have like this gift from God of something that's inclined toward holiness. And we have to perhaps develop it. Some people claim that they don't have the religion gene. They're just not inclined that way. You have two brothers, one loves religion, one just doesn't really relate to it at all. Did they knock it out of themselves, or but according to this, everything we said tonight, we have that potential within us to mimic the divine. As Rabbi Salvation pointed out, the different ways of mimicking the divine. Some people might be very good at mimicking the divine by being very creative, by having a lot of authority. Other people might mimic the divine in more spiritual, what might call more spiritual ways, right? So you have chapter 1, spirituality, which is being like God in terms of creativity, that we should have dominion over the earth, and someone could have image of God in that sense. Someone else could have more of a chapter 2 kind of image of God, where God breathed into him and he has that sort of spiritual inclination. Both could have image of God within them, but one has perhaps a more secular looking expression of it. But again, Rabbi Salvation was trying to argue that both are walking God's ways, both are divine. Obviously, as Jews, we have to do both. We can't just build things and be Bob the Builder and say that I figured out how to get to the moon, so I fulfilled my divine mission. We also have a more spiritual mission of emulating God in other ways of kindness, etc. We have a whole Torah, not just one verse of dominion over earth. Any event, so I think we outline these different possibilities of what we mean when we say we have a spark within us. And therefore, as we approach this question of the image of God and what the image of God means, there is that danger again in the whole topic, the 3-week series that we have. The image of God is somehow we're talking about human being having potential to be like God, mamish, And so this week we begin to sort of knock that notion down a little bit. In subsequent weeks, we won't deal with much with that challenge, but we simply want to understand what is the image of God. Can you lose it? Can you get it? And how is that idea infused throughout the Torah? If it's an important idea, it's not just in Genesis, and that's our 3rd week, is to see where else in the Torah, aside from Genesis, does it become an important point. All right, comments or questions?
Rabbi, if sparks are in each one of us, is that what Zechariah meant? On that day, the Lord will be when He'll gather all the kids together of the Shema. On that, the Lord will be one, as there is one. If the sparks are in the place, then we'll gather all the sparks together. On that day, will be one again.
Well, again, I'm not a big fan of. If it wasn't clear, I'm not a big fan of the idea that there are different sparks of God and you put them back together. But I would say it more normatively. Let's say it the normative way. If God expresses himself in 10 different ways, and of course you have to multiply that by 10 because each way expresses itself in a different way. Anyway, there's at least 10 ways God expresses himself in this world. So the more that is expressed in this world, when it's finally expressed through each one of us in the best way, and where each one of us is reflecting as we should, etc. Maybe that's what it means when all the souls will finish up, Mashiach will come. What does that mean? When all the souls will reflect God the way they should, the world will be burning bright. And then on that day, God will be one, his name will be one. Very good. But again, I wouldn't want to say that God is different pieces and he's thrown around in different pieces, and when he comes back together, then
that's exactly what bothered me, because otherwise he's got to tearing himself apart and throwing. That doesn't make sense to me.
Right. It's also a question: why would he create the world just to tear it apart?
That's right.
Right. Right. Any other comments? I see there's a comment here in person. Yes.
So I was saying that sometimes this Kabbalah Hasidic
supporting hierarchy because there's different types of souls, and there's a tzaddik and the Beinoni. But then you say, but it fit every question, but it doesn't seem to go together. Mamish is mamish. Then they say Eno Bavado, that everything's just God. But when it comes to hierarchy systems, it's very clear that there are certain souls that are higher than others. So it seems to try to do everything, but it doesn't seem to fit.
You know, it's interesting, like to take Chabad, for instance. There's no more loving movement than Chabad. So clearly they're not thinking hierarchically, and they love Gentiles too. And all, but in their book they have the Jewish soul, not Jewish soul.
Yeah.
I don't know. Soul is one thing. I could hear maybe that there's some sort of spiritual endowment a person has as a part of the Jewish people. Possible. When we talk about the image of God, I think there it's very dangerous to say next week when we're talking about the image of God, to say that the Gentiles somehow are lacking in some area, they lost it or something like that. I think there could be wicked people. The Ari asked, Chaim Vital asked the Ari if the wicked people have a soul. So some people tell the story that he said, no, Gentiles don't have the image of God. But I read one place that no, he said wicked people don't have image of God. But again, if you can totally lose it, then don't forget, after we execute somebody, we don't hang their image on the tree too long because the image of God is hanging. So the curse of God is hanging. Somehow that dead body of this wicked guy it reflects God, and we don't want to disgrace it. But wait a second, didn't he lose his image of God? No, he didn't lose it. Is that only because he already did penance because he was hung? Or no? The human being and even the human body has its dignity, irrespective of what we do with it. So, yeah, I think we, especially post-hoc, is really particularly careful about anything that dehumanizes others. So, if there are other options, I'll take option 2. All right. Any last questions from the Zoom audience?
We thank you, Rabbi.
All right. All right. Have a great night. And next week, even more exciting stuff. Please join.
Thank you.
Okay.